Hi, hope you're doing well. So, in this third video about poetry and trauma, I'm going to talk about how I see trauma possibly reflected in Dante's Inferno. And I believe there are two key ways that I see it. And first, it helps me to say, once again, my kind of disclaimer that I'm not an expert in trauma or PTSD or anything related. I have experience with trauma. I have PTSD, and I have expertise in poetry. So that's where I'm coming from. And I believe that Dante experienced a number of things that could be considered trauma, that might have been traumatic for him. One of them was the death of his mother when he was young. Another one was his experience in military. And another one was his having to go through the brutal conflicts between the papacy, the church, and political authorities in Italy. And this is just my limited understanding of what that was like, but there were I believe pretty bloody conflicts between church and state that he went through. So I believe those three things, one or more, all of them, could have been traumatic for him. And in the Inferno, what I have found reading it is this picture of a horrifying, horrible order to things where the religious and the political come together. Other things too, I believe those are primary forces, and they are part of that, kind of the horrors of that order, that ordered system. And what gives some relief, some light, is at least partly, mostly I believe, the figure of Beatrice. And Dante, having not had a mother after a pretty young age, maybe ended up replacing that, or compensating for that loss, that lack, in a lot of ways. Some with literature, maybe a lot with different kinds of social relationships, maybe the mentoring of Guido Cavalcanti, and others. Beatrice ended up being maybe the most powerful figure for him in some ways, even though she appears not to have actually been connected to him much at all. More of a muse figure. But in that capacity, it seems like she ended up being a kind of a loving, semi-divine female presence that ended up not mothering him, but occupying that void or that gap. And so in the Inferno, in my reading of it, she ends up being the kind of saving grace of it all, the positive of it, a figure that offers some kind of relief to the horrors that are predominant in the poem. And in that capacity, she might represent what I understand to be grounding, something that can mitigate the effects of trauma, kind of cool things down, calm things down, keep things from getting too emotionally fraught. And then most of the Inferno, I believe, could be argued, shows people in traumatic circumstances. Trauma, I'm not laughing about trauma, but it kind of seems like an understatement talking about the Inferno. The characters are literally in hell, or, figuratively, but in the poem's version of literally. And although the poem appears to present this elaborate system with the horrors that its characters experience, seeming just, seeming earned, seeming maybe divinely ordained, the message that I personally get from it is that people can end up going through suffering that's out of all proportion to what they might have done, certainly to what they might have expected. And to me, one of the striking things about the Inferno is that the kind of system of justice that it suggests seems so definite, but the characters themselves, in their humanness, kind of call that whole system into question or undermine it. There's this overwhelming sense that they deserve to be there, but the way they're portrayed undermines that sense at the same time, powerfully to me. And so I believe that Dante, partly through the beauty of the language that he portrayed them in, and then through the things that he had them say, was able to make it seem like they don't really deserve to be there. I, as a reader, end up kind of wanting to rescue them, and to me, that's part of the poem's power. And to me, that combination of this overwhelming, brutal order that imposes horrors and this human innocence, human vulnerability, reflects some of the conditions that I'm guessing he experienced, both with his military experience and then trying to function in this maybe psychopathic system where the religious authority or authorities and the political authorities were at each other's throats, and that meant lots of death and lots of other destruction. So there's this overwhelming sense of powerful order, powerful institutions, but also a sense that what they're doing really isn't right, and it's not what people should have to go through. And so that, as I talk about it, I realize that might have somewhat recreated the traumatic loss of his mother, the loss of what might have been loving, nurturing support in his life, and having to kind of deal with a colder world than that. And maybe he experienced that in his adult life with the church and maybe the state that purported to be there for the people, but really were crushing the people, or a lot of them. And so the many characters that he portrayed in hell were playing out some of what he saw people go through in real life, in ways that he metaphorized. And it might also be significant through a trauma lens that Dante wrote the Inferno in Italian rather than Latin. Maybe at the suggestion of Guido Cavalcanti. That move ended up being, a really significant one for maybe Western culture, because he wasn't writing in Latin, in the authoritative, maybe authoritarian language of the church and others, and instead he was writing in a language that more people could understand, if not lots of people. I don't know what literacy was like then. But he was breaking with kind of the world he had known, or at least the kind of power systems, power structures, power figures in the world he had known, by not writing in Latin, not writing in the language that he'd read the classics in, and kind of that he had experienced authority in, that had kind of presented power to him, and maybe even God. Writing instead in the language of the people in his daily life, writing in the language that people spoke out loud in. It might have been a kind of escape from the pain of trauma that for him might have been associated with the kind of master language. And that in itself could have been a kind of grounding. And again, just not saying this as an expert on trauma or PTSD, just somebody who's got it. And it's just a guess. Maybe you like all of this. Thanks.